Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so I'm Julian DeBell, and we talked in my group about in our group about the significance of games to creating virtual community and the difficulties of just establishing the validity of games or feeling comfortable about talking about games as an important kind of activity. So it ranged broadly, but it was a wonderful discussion and a lot of important stuff and great insights got knocked around. Let's see. We started. Tim Burt came in wondering specifically about the problem of how to convey to people that don't play games what it's like to play them. You know, how it feels. You know, how exciting it is to actually be there in your 3,000th hour of killing furbolgs and suddenly get your trinket of whatever. And his question was: is it a problem that there isn't an audience for this stuff in the way that we have an audience for talking about literature or movies that's many decades or centuries old, or is it a problem that we need to work on the rhetoric, on the way in which we talk about them? And that was an interesting question about, you know, what is the sort of language of games criticism, and how might we work on that to sort of to help articulate and legitimate some of the things that go on in games. But let's see. Then we also got around to the question of, you know, what is it that if once upon a time the question about virtual spaces and online spaces was, you know, back in the early 90s when the Lambda Mu phenomenon was happening, there was a lot of excitement about virtual spaces, and a lot of the emphasis was on the spatiality and the intuitiveness of the metaphor, and that this was a special secret ingredient that was going to make virtual spaces more vibrant, authentic, sticky social spaces. And now there's a moment where we sort of wonder, well, was it in fact the spatiality of these spaces, or was it the gaminess of them? Gameness, let's say. Gamey. Many of them were indeed gamey, but that's another question. And Toril made the good point that there are sort of two things that happen in games that are uniquely important to developing and deepening community or a sense of social bonding. One being just common experience, that you have something there that everybody can relate to and is in the same relationship to, and the other being the economy itself and the importance of gift economies as well as market economies to establishing things for people both to talk about and express in a committed way their bonds with each other. I'm you know, as I try to, you know, give the big topics that were discussed, I'm sort of skipping through great little discussions about MySpace and soccer hooligans and all kinds of wonderful things that don't really I'm not able to sort of bring up in a more articulate way because it's after lunch and my brain is in collapse. But the other thing that I thought was important was we narrowed down sort of that question of shared experience because Toril also pointed out that what makes a lot of online communities great and tight is that you're talking about a shared experience. You have a particular kind of sickness. You have something that you're working on a project, right? You are working on a project of making the best model airplane, or getting over your sickness, or recovering from this or that. And so that has that element that games have of a shared project. But Joey was there to sort of inject the reality of, no, something is different about the guild experience and the rigor of building that community. And so that maybe there's something more than just shared experience, it's a shared activity. And Lisa talked about the concept of productive activity in the work of Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger, and their work on communities of practice. And that was a great notion, because it's productive activity. It's something that you were doing together. It creates interdependences and bonds that don't really exist elsewhere. If any of you are wondering about the looseness with which I'm tossing around concepts such as community and authenticity and blah blah blah, don't worry, we niggled those all to death, and I'm not using them in any way that doesn't reflect considerable attention to the various qualifying things that one could say about all of them. In short, it was a great, rigorous, lively, and dare I say productive conversation.
Hi, so this isn't working. Hello? So I'm here to talk about failure. Hug me. Oh, sorry. So I was volunteered on the back channel. This is a sign of a virtual community having intense peer pressure on the... Actually, what happened was Corby nudged the heck out of me and said, they're talking about you in the back channel. You're the only one who took any notes or whatever. So failure went sort of all over the place, but essentially we started with Daniel's premise. He was trying to figure out if blogs are abandoned, 3 posts in, or wikis get started and no one fills anything out, it doesn't become Wikipedia, how do you prove anything is succeeding or failing? And we went on... sort of like if the blog falls in the woods, does anyone really care? And we went over a lot of different things. Like, Lily was pointing out, do we really know what failure means? I mean, if the goal is to produce content and that content lives forever on the internet and your blog post is still there for all of eternity with its one useful post, can you call that a failure? Some people are trying out community applications and they just want to try it out and they've gotten their experiment done. Is that actually a failed use of the product? I'll cut that out. And then the other thing that Josh brought up sort of early on in the game was what we think of as etched in stone now are the old fuddy-duddy ways of the future, meaning the kids who are on IM or Facebook now are used to this. When they get to the corporate enterprise, they're going to be used to blogging about things or sharing things with others. Their intranets may not be our intranets. And he noted that he watched Microsoft change from a non-IM culture to an IM culture. And he was amazed that people actually used their phone when he got out of college because everyone was IMing. So the idea is that the ramp-up cost for unfamiliar technology that we experience today that keep people from using community applications may not be true 5 years from now. Like, my laptop dying. Oh, here we go. Then we started talking about the signals of success, which could range from metrics like this is how many people are on this application on the home page to the corporate metrics by which we justify our existence in terms of blogging or other kinds of community applications. Your results may vary. I think often organizations or corporations are not as used to the idea of what they're measuring, and so bodies and page views may not necessarily show you the success of the application. It depends on who's using it and for what purpose. Folks can correct me, because again, my notes are really rough and they cover everything, whereas I'm trying to sum stuff up here. Lily had this great quote, which I loved forever, which is we don't have email conversations that last through all eternity, although at Microsoft we might. The thing is that, not all communities last forever, not all community exchanges are supposed to last forever. Why are we expecting certain kinds of applications to have this longevity when they may just, do really well, send out the evite, the party's a success. That was a community interaction, but it's not an ongoing hit the bell every time, every month you've got a stat kind of event. So I guess we came away from failure not really feeling very badly. I might have missed something. I don't know, Lily, did I miss anything? Because my notes, like I said, are almost too detailed to present.
Well, I like the other Lily. Where's the other Lily? Right. The thing that I thought was interesting is you started talking about, well, what might be better tools for having sort of these conversations or communities that can kind of have a life cycle, so they can kind of end and emerge, and you don't feel bad for not blogging anymore and things like that. So are there better ways of representing community that sort of represents kind of the way actual communities work better?
Start blogging because you have something to share. Like Slashdot for everyone without the horrible geekiness and like all sorts of other things that you have attention overload, but just a forum.
Right then, I guess I'm next. Is this working? Yes? No? Yep. Okay. I was doing the individual contributions creating aggregate value group. And I want to say to everyone who was in the group, it was really good fun. I really enjoyed it. And if I say anything too stupid or boring or miss anything out, sorry. Oh yeah, I'm not in the back channel for the first time in this conference, so this is the time, I think, if you want to say something. I've heavily summarized this, so hopefully I won't miss out too much. We talked, basically the kind of premise of the thing was there's all these things emerging or have emerged over the last few years in which individual contributions kind of somehow come together to create something that's much larger than the sum of their parts in various ways. And I mean, the obvious examples here, other than Wikipedia, which is obviously the major example of something, a resource that kind of manifests from the tiny engagements of lots of people. Things like Flickr and Delicious and Last.fm, which kind of individual actions around the place, small actions, create like a large annotated corpus of photographs or a massive corpus of URLs that you can explore and move around, or in Last.fm's case, music information. If you don't know Last.fm, you should go and play with it. A really good example about some of the ways these things are being encouraged. I mean, Howard mentioned the IBM situation where they open source a lot of their software, and then suddenly this enormous community of people start engaging around that and playing with it, and this creates an incredible market for IBM themselves to support the software that they've created. And there's this idea that actually you can get a whole clump of people in the world to generate value kind of with or for or near you, and the benefits that can have. I mean, at the end of what we already came up with was kind of division into two major kind of sections, areas that we thought were particularly interesting. If you're trying to get individual contributions to come together to create aggregate value, and these were, just the kind of the processes, an idea of the sense of the processes of software that you would use to make this happen, and the specific user motivations you'd have to kind of build upon and explore to make it successful. We kind of broke the processes, the types of software into kind of two major areas. One which is kind of almost like about condensing information out of the air in between us into some kind of repository or record. So things like Flickr or Delicious, obviously, these things that happen in our daily environments that we do for our own purposes, suddenly manifesting into, condensing in the air into something solid, which we can then use as a resource. And we talked a bit about sites like the ESP game, which got people to play games to tag images. And another service called Peekaboo, which is something similar with component parts of photos. And so along with this kind of condensing model of building aggregate value from individual contributions, this kind of productive or collaborative model where emergent social systems, like in Wikipedia, generated directed activity towards a goal. And kind of These are the two major ones we kind of came up with there. And if you can, then the next major question was how on earth do you get people to participate in these spaces, and why would they do it? And this idea of user motivation for participating in these environments was absolutely core, because the type of people you bring into them necessarily reflects the type and quality of the content you get out of them. So finding the right people is incredibly important, getting a good quality of contribution, more so in certain environments than others. Where environments where you're capturing attention or you're capturing action or activity, it's almost less important what they're specifically doing or that they're expert. But if they're involved in Wikipedia, obviously expertise is very important. And how on earth you kind of filtered out that process and got out the good stuff out of it. So in certain environments where you're looking for action from large distributed groups of people, you're looking for as many people as possible to participate and then to aggregate out or kind of average out their activity in some way to get quality of some kind. Whereas obviously in Wikipedia you wouldn't necessarily want 500 people to write articles and then average out how good it was, because there's a lot of things I'm not very expert in, for example. This kind of idea of motivation came really important. The one good example was Rate My Professor, and probably close to some people's hearts in the organization here. And the kind of reasons that people used it and the kind of actions they got on it, and this kind of sense that like 80% of the activity on Rate My Professor was people reporting crushes that they had, professors they thought were really hot. Maybe that was wish fulfillment from some of the people present, I don't know. Whereas on the other side, there was the other people who weren't reporting crushes on their professors, who no doubt were very attractive, was about complaining about their professors who were very badly behaved or something. So you were getting a lot of kind of extreme reactions, people who loved them or hated them, but no one in the middle. And so, you actually, whether that was creating a useful repository of aggregate value was questionable. And so how to get them into that? You want to find a way of, the obvious motive for getting people to participate in that kind of environment would be altruism. They're trying to do it for their peers and their friends, but it wasn't being explicitly explored properly. So altruism is a very good kind of social need generator, social kind of glue that generates these things, but also questioning whether it's the only one that can work and whether any social system that relies on altruism will inevitably fail. Wikipedia would say maybe not, but lots of other examples where maybe it would. So questions of reputation like reputation, self-interest, showing off, personal utility, Delicious being a prime example of personal utility. People save for their own value, it creates aggregate value. And how important it is in these environments to create a kind of ecosystem that supports different motivations and allows users with different motivations to coexist without fighting. And again, along with the social stuff there's this kind of idea that some of the consequences of trying to get aggregate value out of groups, so that you can't, for example, the prime example here is if you are a social software system that is looking to build aggregate value out of individual utility, what you cannot do is charge people for playing, because you're not going to get enough activity and it just puts everyone off. So, there's kind of these the barriers around it, the edges of how you get people to contribute collectively towards better use. And I thought I'd end up with another thing that Howard mentioned about Steve Weber on the motivations for contributing to open source, because I thought that was a really core kind of angle here, really interesting pitch, and also because it has a nicer dig at Microsoft in it. The kind of motivation. Yeah. I don't know. I barely work for Yahoo. Crap. Hi, Mum. Hi, Katerina. Oh, tech dev, I love you. This is going well. How's the back channel? But I thought these were really interesting motivations because they were very different from, the motivations for participating in this open source culture were, firstly, learning to code. A major motivation for people participating was to socially engage and participate, to learn themselves. Secondly was reputation, and third was social good. So that kind of idea of, altruism alone being a motivator being kind of diminished by these other kind of personal goals. But the fourth one was simply hatred of Microsoft. So if we're all going to go out there and build these things for trying to get aggregate value out of individual things, we can look towards learning, reputation, social good, and hatred of Microsoft, and we can't go wrong. That's me done.
Hi, I'm Joe McCarthy, and I've volunteered, or Lou asked me to report back from our topic, which was linking real objects and online info. I'm going to try to keep this somewhat brief, moving along, given there's other groups we have to hear from. At the highest level, what we found, what we kind of focused on, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone's in the group, we were focusing on what objects are linked to what digital information. So we talked a lot about the different kinds of objects that might have some kind of information online, as well as the kinds of information online that might be linked to objects. Another issue we talked about was how are the links established? Are they done by people intentionally? And if so, what are their intentions? Or are they done just automatically? The objects themselves sort of create the information online. I should mention, too, that part of the motivation for this was Bruce Sterling's book, Shaping Things, where he talks a lot about that. And then once you have links to objects online, then there's the whole issue about tracking those objects over time and space. And they kind of create histories as well. And then you can aggregate all those, pull those all together, and that has all kinds of ramifications as well. And then going back to some things we just heard about, there's the issue of filtering. Once you have all this information out there that's based on objects in the real world and their paths through time and space, what do you do with that? How do you get the stuff that you really want? Another topic we talked about was people or objects too, or at least people carry or wear objects, and that has its own ramifications. Then people essentially become trackable and aggregatable over time. Julian had a really nice way of expressing this, and I hope I've captured this correctly. Objects are a digital portal into information that shapes our actions in the real world, is I think the way you expressed that, or something pretty close to it. And I'm going to post this on the wiki as well. There's a bunch of links. Julian's actually out organizing a workshop, Lift, that's going to be looking at this based, and he's got a paper on blog just so you haven't all seen it. I think I'll stop there and see if anyone else wants to add anything more. I've skipped through a lot of the examples. No? Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you just dig in a little bit more? You said people's objects. You mentioned people's objects.
Yeah. So the idea is that if increasing, there's no, for one thing, there's no doubt in our group that more and more objects are going to have links to digital information, either explicitly created or just as a matter of their manufacture. So then the question, if those objects are carried around by us and we're moving around in time and space and those objects are trackable, then we in effect become trackable as well. So I'm kind of being flippant about saying people are objects, but we in effect become objects, or at least trackable, as we start carrying and wearing these kinds of objects. Other questions or clarifications? Okay. Next.
Nobody wanted to talk to me about data, but everybody wanted to talk to me about social networks, which is a bit depressing. Anyway, so we had various conversations about social networks, which involved me throwing rocks and then admitting some caveats. So my general argument against social networks was that if there's anything that's more important that makes us essentially human, it's the depth and quality of our social relationships. And social network analysis is a very reductionist view of those social relationships and loses a lot of what's the real important research question. It's also something that, it also produces representations which aren't recognizable by the people who are actually in those social relationships. But then I did get convinced to make 3 caveats. So Nick and Tim convinced me about situations where networks are actually parts of systems. So the example being instant messengers, where the actual social network is actually visualized and shown in the application. So I was kind of like, okay, yeah, right, I'll let you off for that one. And then Elizabeth convinced me about situations where people might personally present their own social network and to review and think about their own social networks. I thought that was a bit weird, but hey, okay, I'll give her that one as well. So, and lastly, Rich talked a little bit about the situation where to track viruses, people look at social networks for viruses. And less convinced about that one because I would argue that that's a virus propagation network. You end up talking about, not social networks. So I still stick with my strong theory that social network analysis is no good, but I offer you 3 caveats that I've given. So.
Is any science good by this logic?
Yes.